I had planned my exit strategy months ago. I even wrote my resignation letter and intended to vanish right before the wedding day. However, a cup of ginger tea with a scent strong enough to kill someone kept me in place. Olivia insisted I drink every drop of that wretched liquid while she watched me like a hawk. The next morning, I woke up with the burning taste of ginger still in my mouth. In a fit of rage, I booked a one-way ticket to Paris to give her a little scare by disappearing. She was faster than I anticipated. At midnight, she was already standing at my door with a thermos. She told me not to leave because my stomach was in such bad shape that she needed to make me soup. I couldn't tell if she was worried about my health or her future corporate equity. Then she finished me off by casually suggesting we treat the trip as an early honeymoon. The wedding was only a few days away when my fiancé's old flame suddenly returned to Chicago. His name was Julian Vance. He was her childhood sweetheart and the legendary first love who got away. He had the nerve to stroll right into our rehearsal dinner like he owned the place. He was wearing a custom suit that probably cost more than my first car. He walked straight toward Olivia and grabbed her hand. He looked her in the eyes and begged her to leave with him. My first instinct was to just let them have each other. I stepped forward and took the microphone from the hands of the frantic wedding planner. I told the guests that we were changing the schedule and asked them to applaud the happy couple. Instead of falling into his arms, Olivia spun around. She raised her hand and slapped Julian hard across the face. The sound of the impact echoed through the entire room. She turned to me with bloodshot eyes and a rage she couldn't contain. She demanded that I, Lucas Miller, explain exactly who the hell I thought I was giving her away to. I had rarely seen Olivia lose her cool like this. She looked panicked and vulnerable as she gripped my arm with a strength born of pure desperation. Her manicured nails dug deep into the back of my hand and left several white crescent marks on my skin. Julian stood frozen in place while clutching his bright red cheek. His voice trembled with disbelief as he asked if she had really hit him for my sake. Olivia completely ignored him. I was the one who gave Julian a sympathetic smile. I told him his timing was terrible. She had been stressed out all week. I suggested that if he really wanted to crash the party, he should have shown up before she spent 3 months planning this dream wedding. While my mind was racing, Olivia interrupted me with a dangerously low voice. She told me to look at her. She accused me of not actually wanting to marry her. After 6 years together, I knew that tone perfectly. It was the warning sign that she was ready to burn the whole world down. I lacked the courage to even meet her gaze. I shrugged and tried to act as if I didn't care when I asked if this wasn't what she wanted. Julian was a complete mess. A thin scratch from Olivia's diamond ring was beginning to bleed on his cheek. The wound transformed him from a romantic lead into a pathetic villain from a low-budget movie. That was when I realized how out of place he looked standing next to her. Olivia was practically radiant tonight. Her voice suddenly became unexpectedly soft. She asked me about the property in the north side and the monthly company shares we had discussed. She asked if I was really willing to walk away from all of that. I told her I still wanted them. I looked up and locked my eyes onto hers with genuine intensity. No one would walk away from that much money. I told her I wasn't the type to play the part of a tragic and devoted lover. To understand how we got here, you have to go back to our first meeting. Olivia Davenport was the unreachable queen of the campus and the crown jewel of the Davenport family. Everyone knew she was out of their league. I was just another face in the crowd of ordinary students. We finally crossed paths at the final formal gala after graduation. She was wearing a floor-length crimson gown with her hair swept up in an elegant style. She didn't have to do anything. Just by standing there, she made the entire ballroom feel like her personal stage. My friends could not take their eyes off her. When the slow music started, they pushed me toward her while laughing. One of them whispered that it was a shame Julian Vance wasn't around to see it. Then they made me pause. I had heard it 1,000 times during our college years. Julian Vance was the piano prodigy who got into Juilliard early and left for Europe to continue his studies. People always remarked that I bore a resemblance to him. He was the first love that Olivia had lost long ago. Perhaps that resemblance was all it took in a chaotic room full of people. Across the crowded and noisy ballroom, Olivia's gaze locked onto mine. She walked toward me with a slow and deliberate grace. The faint scent of champagne reached me before she did. Her long and cool fingers brushed against my jawline. In that moment, it felt like the entire world had shifted off its axis. She whispered that she had finally found me. Every guy in college had the same fantasy. They dreamed of being chosen by a rich and beautiful woman to live out a fairy tale. I never asked her who she was actually looking for that night. She never admitted who she thought I was. We swapped iMessage details, and things just took off from there. Olivia was 2 years older than me. She was brilliant and independent with a lot of real-world experience. She had jumped into the cutthroat startup scene very early on. We bonded over the fact that we were both trying to build something from nothing. Her grasp of business operations was truly impressive. We talked constantly. I would tell her about all the dumb and funny little things that happened to me during the day. My favorite part was hearing her laugh or sigh while giving me advice I didn't even know I needed. We eventually discovered that we shared many of the same strange habits. We both loved ridiculously spicy chicken wings and spent our weekends playing tennis. We both dreamed of traveling the world someday. I never had the courage to ask her in person, but I finally brought it up during a late-night phone call. I mentioned that everyone thought I looked like her old friend Julian and asked for her expert opinion. There was a brief silence before she let out a low and slightly husky laugh. The sound of her voice went straight to my heart. She told me that I was unlike anyone else. I was young and arrogant back then. It was incredibly easy to fall for a woman who seemed like my perfect match. 6 years of peace and quiet made me lazy and overconfident. I almost forgot that I was just a placeholder. My decision to step aside was something I had been planning for a while. The idea had been brewing in my mind for 3 months. That was when Julian returned from Europe. It was also when Olivia suddenly started bringing up the topic of marriage. Our business had finally reached a point of stability. For years, she had promised to take me to Paris once things settled down. It was a promise she had made many times before. One day I was scrolling through Instagram and saw a story posted by one of her colleagues. There was a photo of Olivia smiling in front of the Eiffel Tower. A strange and icy feeling of calm washed over me. Only half of the man's face was visible in the shot. I knew immediately that it was the man whose shadow I had lived in for years despite never meeting him. Julian was in Paris that night too. Olivia got home from her business trip around 11 that night. She dragged her suitcase toward the bedroom and went straight into the bathroom. A few moments later, her phone on the nightstand started vibrating incessantly while it was charging. I rolled over to silence it, and the glare of the screen pierced the darkness. The top notification was from a contact saved as Julian V. He asked Olivia if she would see him when he returned in a few days. A series of photos immediately followed and pushed the text up the screen. I tried to unlock the device, but realized she had changed her passcode. When she finally emerged from the bathroom, she was wrapped in a towel and surrounded by a cloud of steam. I sat on the bed and stared at the fancy box of pastries she had placed on the nightstand. I don't have a sweet tooth, and neither does she. It was obvious who those treats were meant for. I gestured toward her phone with my chin. I told her that Julian had messaged her. She stiffened for a second before pretending nothing was wrong as she picked up the phone to send a quick reply. She tossed the phone aside. I remarked that she hadn't even read the full message. I shrugged and said I didn't need to read it to know that a grown man acting that clingy was embarrassing. Olivia looked at me, and a slow smile crept across her face. I had always loved her eyes because they were so bright and expressive. When she looked at you, it felt like you were the only person left in the universe. She stayed silent for a moment before dropping a total bombshell. She asked if I wanted to enter into a trial marriage. She suggested a contract-based arrangement to make her ex jealous enough to come crawling back. I asked if I was just a pawn in her game. I was about to laugh until she started talking about the financial incentives. She mentioned the Northside property and the additional company shares. That piece of land didn't mean much to her portfolio, but for me, it was the missing link between two of my biggest projects. She knew exactly how badly I wanted it. It was a mutually beneficial arrangement. Our crumbling relationship was suddenly reinforced by cold and hard data. She saw the excitement I couldn't hide and added one more thing. She said we would lead separate lives and stay out of each other's personal business. I agreed so quickly it was almost embarrassing. Who needs romance when you have a real estate empire to build? From that moment on, she was basically my boss. She seemed to see right through my greed. She gave a little laugh that sounded somewhat resigned. She told me not to call her boss since I was technically her husband. In the end, the whole wedding was just a business merger with some vows thrown in. Now, the real majority shareholder had returned. It was time for me to make my exit. A contract is a contract, especially when the person writing the checks is very specific about the terms. The entire dinner party was now in total chaos. The guests were whispering among themselves while Julian just stood there frozen. All the grace of a world-class pianist had completely evaporated. I actually felt a little embarrassed for the guy. I shoved the MC's cue cards into his hand and told him he might as well host the wedding for me. Olivia's expression turned cold. She stared at Julian's face as it turned a deep shade of purple. She asked him if he had lost his mind. She wanted to know if he realized that crashing a wedding to kidnap a bride was a serious crime. She told him he was lucky she didn't call the police. I thought to myself that he should have at least tried to steal her in private. I didn't dare say it out loud. She gave me a sharp look that told me to shut up before I made things worse. The Davenports and the Van Cess were some of the most powerful families in Chicago. Julian's little stunt tonight was guaranteed to be on the front page of every gossip site by morning. The media was going to have a field day with this story. I could already see the headlines about childhood sweethearts and wedding day showdowns. Rich people really do love their drama. The party dragged on until the early hours of the morning. Once the last guest had left, I pulled out my phone to call an Uber. My screen was covered in notifications. The Vance family PR team was clearly failing to contain the scandal. Julian was quickly being painted as the pathetic pining ex in a cheap soap opera. Meanwhile, my Twitter following exploded by 10,000 people in a single night. The comment section was a total war zone. At least it didn't cost me anything to let them vent. One user told Julian to get a grip and called him a homewrecker. A local gossip account asked if my presence in her life was as small as my time on screen. Julian's fan club was demanding to know why Olivia was staying silent. Some random user asked how she could marry a nobody like me when Julian was waiting for her. I held a completely wasted Olivia steady with one arm while I continued to scroll through the hate. I felt a sudden surge of protectiveness for her. I posted a reply telling everyone that I was just a last-minute replacement and asked them to leave her alone. Olivia slumped against my shoulder and opened her eyes. She looked at me with an unreadable expression. She mumbled that I was a hopeless case. She had been drinking since the evening and had finally hit her limit. She leaned on me while she threw up in the bushes outside the venue. I sighed and told her I wasn't the one who was hopeless. I carefully wiped her mouth with a handkerchief. During the first few years of my startup, I had nearly worked myself to death. Pulling all-nighters and drinking at networking events was just part of the job. I had completely ruined my stomach, and now it was a permanent issue. Olivia had strictly forbidden me from touching alcohol. She was always incredibly protective when it came to my health. She could be so attentive, yet so blind at the same time. The ride home was uncomfortably quiet. She was so drunk that she was looking at me like I was a husband who had just been caught cheating. She slurred that she would take care of the mess on the internet. I told her that was great news. I was genuinely relieved that she was going to handle the public relations disaster. She accused me of not caring about anything. I asked her if she meant the PR costs because I definitely cared about the money. I looked over at her and realized she had finally lost her battle with the alcohol and fallen fast asleep. Her head lolled to the side as she sank into a deep sleep. The streetlights cast long and flickering glows across the pavement. Our shadows looked lonely as they stretched out behind the car. The car was warm, but I could feel a familiar ache starting to rise in my chest. I have never been a sentimental person. However, feelings are not like light switches that you can just flip off whenever you want. The car dropped us off at our apartment building. We had bought this place together. She had handled all the interior design and obsessed over every single detail. Maybe our tastes were just similar. Or maybe her style was just a reflection of Julian's. Before we left the party, I had managed to get Julian's contact information and followed him on Instagram. I scrolled through his feed and found a post from 3 months ago. There was Olivia standing right there with him in Paris. Her warm breath was hitting my neck, but I felt cold inside. The wedding ring on my finger suddenly felt heavy and foreign. I laid her down on the sofa. I carefully slid the ring off and placed it on a coffee table. Olivia's eyes fluttered open for a second. She gave me a goofy smile. She mumbled a few incoherent words before sinking right back into a deep sleep. I leaned in closer to try and catch what she was saying. She whispered that she had found me. I wondered who or what she was actually talking about. I sat down beside her and picked up her phone. Her new passcode was the date of our wedding. It was a date that also happened to be Julian's birthday. I thought to myself that if he had crashed the wedding earlier, he could have turned it into a birthday party. He would have had the girl and the celebration. Instead, he was stuck staring at his phone and worrying. The screen lit up again as a new message arrived. As her brand new husband, I felt it was my duty to check it for her. I whispered that she had a new text message. I muttered under my breath and swiped the screen open. My own contact was pinned at the top with a heart and fire emoji. However, the latest message was actually from Julian. Julian asked her if she had really made up her mind. He told her that I was just a substitute and asked why he wasn't good enough. I couldn't help but think what a fool he was. Julian reminded her that it was his first birthday back in the country and asked why she wouldn't spend it with him. He claimed he knew she wasn't actually drunk. I looked over at the woman who was currently a total mess on my sofa. I watched the typing bubble appear and disappear on the screen. The guy was such a drama queen. I scrolled up to read the full text of the message I had seen earlier. Julian had asked to see her as soon as he got back. He told her he knew about the wedding, but begged her to wait for him. He pleaded with her not to be so cold. That was brutal. I took a deep breath as I realized something shocking. Olivia Davenport was a complete and total player in the game of love. Olivia sat up and grumbled that I talked too much. My hand shook as I held her phone. She leaned against my back, and I could smell the champagne on her breath. Her skin felt hot against my spine. She reached around and felt for my hand. She frowned and asked me where my wedding ring had gone. I tried to quickly put the phone away so I could grab the ring from the table. She was clinging to me so tightly that I was afraid she would fall if I moved. In my haste, my elbow clipped the ring and sent it flying off the table. I watched helplessly as it bounced once and rolled right under the TV stand. Olivia sighed softly in my ear. She told me that if I didn't like those rings, we could go out and pick a new set tomorrow. Her voice was gentle, but I could hear a trace of genuine hurt in her tone. Olivia was never the type of person to act cute or needy. I was absolutely certain she was currently experiencing a total blackout. I told her that I wasn't Julian. After a moment, I added that I wasn't anybody else either. The drunk version of Olivia was surprisingly honest. She looked at me with total seriousness and nodded. She said she knew exactly who I was. She called me her husband and the father of her child. I stopped her and asked what child she was talking about. I felt like the biggest idiot in the world. I whipped my head around to look at her. She just shook her head and gave me an innocent smile. She told me she wasn't pregnant yet, but wanted to give me a little heads up as a surprise. It was certainly a surprise, all right. She curled up in my arms, and her warm breath tickled my ear as she fell asleep. I went completely stiff and didn't dare to move a muscle. She was blissfully unaware and sleeping soundly in the middle of the night. Her phone rang one more time. In my half-asleep state, I could hear Julian on the other end, sobbing his heart out. He was crying so loudly that it was impossible for me to get any rest. Olivia gently squeezed my hand before quietly sliding out of the bed. It was exactly 3:30 in the morning. I stayed in the exact same position until the sheets beside me had gone completely cold. Olivia never came back to bed. I opened Instagram and saw that Julian had just posted something new. It was a close-up photo of a hand wearing a wedding ring. I recognized it immediately. It was my ring, or rather, it was Olivia's ring. The caption identified him as Julian V, the pianist. He wrote that those who dance seem crazy to those who can't hear the music. The ring in the photo was the exact one I placed on her finger. To make matters even worse, I could see her reflection in the glass of the coffee table. Her face was blurry, and I couldn't tell what she was feeling. I assumed she was happy because it was Julian's 21st birthday. If it wasn't for the current mess we were in, they probably would have been married years ago. I felt a hollow sensation in my chest, as if something had been ripped out. 6 years of my life wasn't something that could just vanish in a thin air. If Olivia didn't care, I couldn't let myself drown in those feelings alone. She stayed out all night. I was too stubborn to sleep, so I just stared at the ceiling until the sun started to come up. She finally walked through the door wearing a completely different outfit. She was in a sharp business suit and looked like she was ready to take over the world. I sat on the sofa and waited for her to look at me. I told her she was finally home. She nodded and walked over to me with a smile. She asked if I had missed her. I didn't say anything and just reached for the cold takeout sitting on the dining table. She was on her period and my stomach was acting up again. This order of insanely spicy noodles was basically a weapon of mass destruction for both of us. She was staring at me so intensely that I had to put my chopsticks down. Going down in flames together wasn't really my style. She saw right through me and told me to get to the point. I asked her if she had spent the night with Julian just to celebrate his birthday. Olivia looked genuinely stunned for a second. She handed me a glass of hot water before pouring one for herself. She slowly told me that she hadn't. She claimed she was looking for someone because she needed their help. I asked if she meant that 6-foot-tall college student who still managed to look shorter than me. She blinked at me with a look of pure confusion. It was classic. A pro player like her didn't even remember the people she was meeting. I reminded her about the kid in the white shirt who visited her office last week. Olivia always got cold in the winter. She also had a habit of drinking this disgusting herbal tea before her period started. I had gone to the office to drop some off for her when I saw him. He was a young kid who still looked like a student, but he had a very calculating look in his eyes. He got right into her car. It was the same car I had bought as a wedding gift for her. I knew that car inside and out. 20 minutes later, the kid got out of the car looking pale as a ghost. Olivia's expression turned very serious. She told me that I was her husband and that there was no one else. She told me to stop overthinking things. I stared at the cup of ginger tea she gave me and pointed out that she didn't even remember how much I hated the taste. She pushed the cup toward me and said it was good for my stomach. She told me to be a good boy and drink it. I looked into her smiling eyes and proceeded to chug 3 full cups. I woke up the next morning with the taste of ginger still coating my tongue. I finally decided that it was my turn to give Olivia a little shock. Of course, my decision had nothing to do with the tea itself. A few days ago, Olivia's mother had cornered me. She offered me $5 million to leave her daughter forever. I honestly thought I was dreaming at the time. I wondered if my big movie moment had finally arrived. She told me to be smart and walk away before the marriage became official. When I didn't answer, she offered to throw in another $5 million. She slapped a black card onto the table and then pulled it back as if it hurt her to lose it. She gave a long sigh and really leaned into the performance. I sighed right along with her and spent a few seconds mourning the money I wasn't going to get. Her tone softened as she called me dear. She told me it wasn't about the money. She said Julian's reputation was in tatters, and she was afraid he might do something reckless. She suggested I stay out of the public eye for a while. I wanted to tell her that I wasn't some damsel in distress from a romance novel. Then I happened to glance out the window. I saw a car that looked exactly like Julian's driving by. The car accelerated and sped around the corner. I told her that I understood and would leave. I took the initial $5 million and booked my flight that very same day. I threw some clothes into a suitcase and headed for Paris. Olivia had promised to explain everything to me the next day, but she left for work early to deal with a full schedule of meetings. I covered the entire apartment in sticky notes that I filled with my honest feelings. My handwriting was so messy it looked like gibberish. The first message she sent me when she got home was a complaint about not being able to read them. She told me she couldn't understand a single word I had written. She sent an iMessage asking where I was. I felt like that meme of the cat leaving the group chat. I texted her back saying I was in Paris. She asked if I was dying or something. A few seconds later, my phone started ringing with a FaceTime call from her. I was lounging on a beach chair while soaking up the sun and sipping a smoothie. Her screen was dark, and I could see the streetlights flashing past her car window. She was clearly driving. She glanced at the screen while making a turn and asked if I was drinking something cold again. I told her I wasn't. I casually moved the smoothie out of the camera's frame. She asked me what kind of disease I had and if it was stomach cancer. I joked that I didn't know I could pick my own diagnosis. Her expression grew dark, and I could hear her voice start to tremble. She claimed the doctor said I only had a few months left to live. I told her she really needed to stop reading those trashy romance novels. I was shocked when Olivia showed up much sooner than I thought she would. The clock had just struck midnight when she knocked on my hotel room door. The pale moonlight created a silhouette behind her. She gave me an exhausted smile and held out a thermos. She told me not to leave her because my stomach was in such bad shape that she needed to make me chicken soup. In that moment, I really started to wonder what was going on. If I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, I would have thought her brain had been hijacked by a romance novel plot. She looked completely spent and was still wearing the suit she had put on for work that morning. I was going to get her a glass of water, but she just stood in the doorway and stared at me. I tried to act casual while spinning my glass and asked her what she wanted to know. She studied me in silence for a long time before asking if I really didn't have cancer. I knew right away that this wasn't going to be a short conversation. I just pulled out my phone and showed her all of my medical reports from the last 6 months. She took the phone and scrolled through every single page. She was reading them more intently than she had ever read my business proposals. I watched her as she looked down at the screen. I wondered if she was worried about me dying young and losing the company's shares, or if she was already calculating how to split the inheritance. I told myself to stop thinking like that. I figured that at worst, I would just have my name and my height carved into my tombstone so people wouldn't walk over my feet. I'm not that vain, but I am 6'2". Olivia was trembling slightly when she handed the phone back to me. She suggested that we treat the trip as an early honeymoon. She asked if I wanted to visit the Eiffel Tower the next day. I rubbed the edge of my glass with my thumb and nodded. I told her that sounded like a plan. It felt like the sword hanging over my head had wobbled, but decided not to drop just yet. I used to imagine us having a dramatic confession on a beautiful street in a foreign country. Now, all I wanted was to sit down and have a real conversation with her about her future. Nobody could say for sure how many tomorrows we had left. Olivia was never the kind of person who would intentionally ruin a good mood. Over the next few days, she actually turned off all her phone notifications. We spent our time doing a bunch of completely pointless but incredibly fun activities together. In the boardroom, she was a shark who could tear people apart. She had never once turned that ruthlessness toward me. In her private life, Olivia was one of the most gentle and caring people I had ever met. If Julian hadn't suddenly come back into the picture, I probably would have been happy to live out the rest of my life with her while pretending I didn't know the truth. We took walks under the moonlight and held each other in front of the Eiffel Tower. We could hear a violin playing somewhere nearby. I reached out and tucked a stray lock of hair behind her ear. I was about to ask if I could kiss her when she read my mind. She gave me a little smile. She asked if her husband really needed to file an application just to kiss his own wife. Her breath hitched for a second, and my heart felt like it was going to beat out of my chest. I pulled her into me and kissed her with a mix of intensity and care. It was a long and slow kiss. When we finally pulled apart, her eyes were unfocused and her bright red lipstick was a little smudged. I was completely captivated by her and was getting ready for a second round. I felt a tug on my pant leg that felt like someone had hit the pause button on the moment. I looked down and saw a little blonde girl with big round blue eyes. She asked me if I wanted to buy a rose for the lady. Olivia looked a bit annoyed as she turned toward the child. The little girl's face suddenly lit up as she recognized Olivia from a previous visit. She pointed out that Olivia had a different man with her this time. All of the romance we had built up immediately shattered into pieces. I covered my ears and looked at Olivia while pretending that I couldn't understand a word of French. The little girl pulled a crumpled photo out of her pocket. She looked at me and then back at the photo. Then she suddenly turned around and ran away as fast as she could. I thought to myself that she was like a little spy with face blindness who had just ruined the entire mission. Olivia and I were left standing there in total shock. She suddenly asked me if I wanted to know why she had been in Paris 3 months ago. I couldn't bring myself to look at her because I was afraid of her clear and steady gaze. I knew this conversation was inevitable. I had always imagined it happening on a quiet afternoon over coffee, or perhaps after a nice dinner. I just never knew how to start the conversation. Olivia was the same as always. She was direct and didn't waste any time getting to the point. Before I could even finish my dream, she had hit the stop button. I could already hear the breakup music playing on a loop inside my head. I looked up at the sky and tried to calculate how long my mother-in-law's $5 million would last me while I wallowed in self-pity. The city lights began to flicker on one by one. Everyone around us seemed lost in their own little worlds. Some were lost in each other's arms while others were just staring at the view. Then there was me, wishing I could just dig a hole all the way back to Chicago. I heard the sound of hurried footsteps as the little girl appeared once again. This time she was wearing sunglasses and carrying a giant bouquet of bright red chili peppers instead of roses. I waved my hand at her and wondered if she really thought I wouldn't recognize her just because of the glasses. The girl was out of breath when she told me the flowers were a gift from the lady standing next to me. She wished me a happy wedding. Olivia took the spicy bouquet and held it out toward me. She told me they were the specific peppers I loved from that farm outside of Chicago. My eyes started to sting, and I let out a massive sneeze. I immediately tried to push the peppers away from my face. Under the lights of the Eiffel Tower, Olivia was still as beautiful as ever. She smiled and told me she had ordered them 3 months ago. She wished me a happy wedding. Then she asked if we could talk when we got back to the room. I gave her a dull nod. The moon looked like a tiny silver sliver hanging in the night sky. I looked down at our shadows and saw that they were merged together into a single outline. I felt a strange and inappropriate sense of joy rising up inside me. I was still in a daze by the time we reached the hotel. We closed the door and shut out the rest of the world. Olivia kicked off her high heels and slid into a pair of slippers. I heard the soft sound of her slippers on the floor as she stopped right next to me. I was sitting on the sofa and still clutching that bouquet of peppers while my eyes watered from the heat. Olivia took the peppers away from me and set them aside. She leaned in close and locked her eyes onto mine. That was the moment I realized she had always looked at me that way. Her gaze was always so direct and intense, but I was usually the one who looked away. She asked me if I knew that I was always trying to avoid her. I could hear the amusement in her voice. I was completely stunned and asked her what she meant. She leaned in even closer until I was surrounded by that familiar and fresh woody scent. It was the exact same perfume I had complimented 6 years ago. She had never used a different scent after that day. I had nowhere left to run. She placed her cool hand against my cheek and told me she had been waiting for me to fall in love with her. She told me that I'd spent our entire relationship just waiting for her to cheat on me. That revelation was so overwhelming that it felt like my brain was crashing. Olivia started pinching my cheeks so hard that I couldn't even speak. I could only manage a confused sound. She sat back and began to study me as if I were some kind of complex research project. She asked if this wasn't exactly like one of those romance novels. She joked about the whole fake marriage turning into real love trope. I told her no, and that it actually made me feel a bit uneasy. I suggested that she really needed to stop reading those books. She thought back to our college days, and I felt like I could almost hear what she was thinking. She put a finger to her lips and told me she wasn't going to share all of her secrets. My mind was spinning in circles. I felt like a farmer who had been working in the fields all day under a hot sun. Then I realized I had been plowing the completely wrong field the whole time. My hands were shaking as I grabbed her hand and interlaced our fingers. I asked her if she actually knew that I could skip a stone 15 times in a row. Olivia nodded and mentioned that she also knew I had once hit 5 3-pointers without missing a single shot. She called us soulmates. She laughed and said it would have been more fun if she could have heard my thoughts earlier. We talked so much that night that the sun was already coming up. Both of our voices were raspy from talking. I even dragged her into a silly ritual where I joked about making a blood oath to stay together. She explained that Julian was nothing more than an old friend to her. She pulled up her Twitter profile and showed me. She told me she only contacted him because she figured he would know some good spots in Paris. She shoved the phone in my face, and I saw that her profile picture was an old photo of us kissing under a streetlight back in college. Her most recent tweet was a reply to a joke I had made years ago. She had replied to me saying that I was unlike anyone else. She looked me in the eyes and told me it was because she loved me. The comment section went absolutely wild. Julian called her phone almost immediately. It was finally my turn to shine. I hummed a victory song and leaned back comfortably as I answered the call. I answered and identified myself as her husband. I asked the former boyfriend what he could possibly want with my wife. There was a long silence before Julian rasped out a demand to speak with Olivia. I told him that she was already asleep. At that exact moment, I was watching Olivia carefully peel a shrimp and pop it in my mouth. Julian snarled that I was still just a substitute. I took my time chewing the shrimp before responding. I asked him if he wanted to know why she had really come to see me on our wedding day. I told him she had asked for my help in finding her old high school crush. Olivia leaned toward the phone and told him that she had already found him. She thanked him for his concern. She immediately hung up the phone without giving Julian a chance to say another word. She rested her head on my shoulder. I gently stroked the back of her neck and joked about how many of these substitutes she actually had. I asked her about the college kid who was shorter than me. She shook her head and told me no. She said it had only ever been me. It was always just me. This story isn't about grand gestures or dramatic betrayals. It's about the quiet, everyday ways we fail to see the person right in front of us. Ethan spent 6 years believing he was a placeholder, a stand-in for a past love he could never compete with. Olivia spent 6 years waiting for him to realize he was never a replacement at all. They both loved each other, but fear and insecurity kept building walls that neither knew how to tear down. The truth is, sometimes we misread silence as rejection, kindness as obligation, and loyalty as convenience. We convince ourselves we're not enough when the whole time we were exactly what the other person wanted. The hardest lesson here isn't about trusting others. It's about trusting that you are worthy of being chosen, not as a second option, but as the only one. And sometimes, the person who seems distant is just waiting for you to stop running away.